Hi everyone, and welcome to the final forecast for 2020, the full moon in Cancer. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to have a look at the energies coming up for the next 2 weeks and some of the major themes and trends. I'm also going to be looking at the Sabian symbol, the fixed star aspects, and later there's going to be a breakdown per sign of where the full moon will fall. So I hope you enjoy it. In many ways, the Cancer full moon acts as the perfect bookend to the lunar eclipse that we had at the beginning of the year, the Wolf moon lunar eclipse, which happened within a day of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And of course, that really was the defining aspect of 2020 in so many ways, which has, been very intense. I think we can all kind of attest to that. So I think one of the first things that we'll notice as we move into this particular waning lunar phase is that there'll be a kind of huge release, a sigh of relief as we move out of 2020 and into 2021. Secondly, I think that it's also going to, on many levels, raise our kind of emotional sensitivity. Cancer is a very sort of emotional sign, and very often it can make us feel quite vulnerable. So there is sometimes a tendency to kind of want to go and run away and hide and withdraw, or to fall into patterns of feeling like victims, or feeling a little bit sorry for ourselves. So I think that's just something to watch, particularly given that we've got a Venus-Neptune square happening on the same day, which very often can distort our perceptions and put us into a place where we don't feel very powerful, where we sort of give our power away. Now, this could be in the form of not having strong boundaries, but equally it could be where we tend to take we tend to give our power to others and then feel resentful or powerless, because they have more of a say over our well-being than perhaps we'd like. So I think it's kind of realizing that this is a two-edged sword, and that very often the patterns that we learn in childhood, where we tend to over idealize a parent, for example, who can never possibly live up to expectations. We tend to see our parents as gods when we're small, and then as we grow up we start to realize that they are less than perfect, and that can bring up all sorts of feelings of resentment and anger and that kind of thing. And I think we then tend to do the same thing to certain structures in society, like governments or authority figures. We kind of project this, will you be my savior, will you kind of provide for me, not realizing that that also means that we essentially give away our power. So I think a lot of the energy around us this full moon will be about integrating lessons that we've learned over the last year or so about the kind of limits of that particular model, and how it isn't necessarily very healthy, because it essentially produces codependency and a cycle of sort of dominance on one hand and powerlessness on the other. So that's something to think about. The luminaries will also be making a T-square to Chiron, and for me that's all about opportunities to heal ancestral wounds. And here I think this feeds into what I've been talking about, where we kind of need to bring the sort of paternal and maternal energies into balance, within ourselves, but also on a social level. Sort of learning about the difference between caring on one hand and codependency on the other, and of course the importance of self-care, but not also taking that too far, and kind of moving into that sort of self-pitying, selfish energy that can sometimes be the extreme of moving into the sort of wounded child, as opposed to the sort of the overbearing parent, if you know what I mean. So trying to find a balance there between self-care on one hand and healthy sort of cooperation, if you like, on the other. So this is cardinal earth and water energy. So there's an opportunity here for also sort of getting clearer about things like abundance, because Venus is not just about relationships, although she can be. And there's, as I've said in I think it was the Venus retrograde video that I did around about June, July, there is often a very strong link between the ways we conduct ourselves in relationships and our relationship to money, for example. So I think now is also a really good time to rethink our approach to abundance, and also what giving and taking means. What a healthy reciprocal relationship with money or an employer looks like, for example, or a healthy more balanced relationship when it comes to, say, our creative efforts, and whether we feel that we are recognized for those creative efforts fairly, or whether we feel that we're kind of exploited. I think there's going to be a lot of kind of core wounding that's going to come up for healing, and I think the key thing here is to really allow it to come up, not to get consumed by it. So not allow that sort of the danger, of self-pity, kind of creeping in. So not allowing that to completely take us over, but instead using this as an opportunity for clearing. And here I do have to recommend something called the Emotional Code by somebody called Dr. Bradley Nelson. I don't know if you've come across it, but I first was introduced to it when I had an Akashic Records reading in, I think it was October, and it was so cathartic and effective that I do recommend it. If you are sort of feeling very emotional and you want to sort of allow energies in your body to flow again, so they don't get sort of stuck or trapped. And he's actually got a website where he offers you a sort of free or trial version of his technique, which you can try for yourself. You can actually do it on yourself. So I'll put a link at the end of the video or in the description box if this is on YouTube, and you can go and have a look and check it out for yourself. But really a fantastic, and I think very appropriately Cancer themed way of transmuting difficult emotions right now, so that you kind of clear the way for 2021 and you don't go in feeling the continued burdens of things that came up during 2020. So the Sabian symbol for this particular lunar degree is a small naked girl bending over a sparkling pond trying to catch a fish, which for me was immediately sort of evocative of the star card in the tarot, which I've put an image of the Rider-Waite trump card here. Except that this is a girl rather than a woman, and I find that image interesting. So first of all, she's naked, which in sort of esoteric symbology means that she's innocent, and secondly, she's a girl rather than a woman, so there is this sense of being of childlike innocence, essentially. And as kids, I think a lot of us can remember going to the beach and sort of splashing in rock pools and trying to catch fish with our hands. So I think it's quite an interesting image, quite evocative and sort of nostalgic. But I think what it's pointing to in a lot of ways is a longing, sort of trying to grasp onto things that are elusive. If you think of a fish, it's quite slippery and sort of wriggles away quite easily. And I think it's talking about perhaps what feels unattainable, or that we keep sort of like reaching for or grasping for, but that's always just kind of out of reach, or that slips through our fingers. And this for me fits quite well, especially with all the sort of water imagery of the Venus-Neptune square that's going to be happening on the very same day as this Cancer full moon. Now, if you think Venus-Neptune has been a big theme this year, we've had 4 squares in total. This is going to be the 4th and final one. The first 2, I think, happened in May, and then we had another one in July when Venus was retrograde, and this is really the sort of the follow-up to that. Now, the main difference, of course, is that Venus will now be in the opposite sign of Sagittarius. So for me, this is almost a kind of a closing of a loop where we are seeing things from two opposite sides of the same coin. Venus in Gemini was very much about looking at communication, knowledge, and what we sort of value when it comes to kind of ideas about relationship, whether our ideas are valued, in the workplace. I think there was a lot around sort of ideas and content theft, about mimicry. I certainly saw that, particularly on social media. I just became so aware of the nicking of people's ideas and concepts and that kind of thing. But I think in relationships, it also sort of brought up a lot of issues around deception, people not being entirely honest, not stating their needs or stating their true expectations or intentions. So, a lot here about lying and what we sort of say on one hand versus, the way that we behave on the other. Now we're kind of, Venus is now in the flip sign of Sagittarius, which is, of course, about the bigger picture. It's about learned experience, wisdom that comes with age and also with with life experience, and of course that stands in strong contrast to this naked girl who is quite innocent, you know, in many ways kind of epitomizing the Cancerian child. So I kind of feel as though now we are seeing the flip side of that coin, where we're kind of looking at some of the experiences, or perhaps the difficulties that we encountered during Venus retrograde and those first 3 squares between Venus and Neptune, and we're looking at things from the opposite perspective, and it's allowing us to perhaps see also where our own beliefs or perceptions, or a sort of a failure to live according to our, you know, our principles or our beliefs may have also led to some of the disappointments perhaps that we experienced, you know, during Venus retrograde. So it's almost kind of saying, well, you know, just take, for example, relationships. You know, if you experience some kind of disappointment where you felt that somebody was, you know, always sort of dishonest with you, sometimes the flip side of that is saying, well, what sort of what within me believed that was how I deserve to be treated. Because so often there are kind of red flags. People may not say something, but if we compare actions to words, for example, if we compare the disparity between sort of promises on one hand and then whether those are fulfilled on the other, very often it's very clear. Actually, we can sort of use our judgment to see that this person makes promises that they don't keep, and then why, you know, at that point I think it's important for us to say, well, why am I staying then, or why am I tolerating this disrespect, or, you know, why do I continue to give to a situation that's not fair or reciprocal, or, you know, where an employer has been dishonest, or, you know, something like that. So I think it's as I say, at this final square of 2020, I think it's really about letting go of any places where we've got blinkers or blind spots, and where we've kind of failed to see things, the bigger picture, you know, to see things as they truly are, and then to sort of make decisions, you know, judgment calls from there, to actually take action, in the sense of if I don't feel that this is a great situation, or this is a disappointing situation, then actually having the courage to do something about that. So yeah, it's just something to think about. Right, so here we have the chart for the full moon in Cancer, and as you can see, it happens at about 3:30 a.m. GMT here in London. So an interesting chart from a lot of perspectives. The sun and the moon will be at around about 9 degrees of Cancer Capricorn. This is a full moon, of course, so they are on the opposite sides of the zodiac or the horizon. So the moon is with the earth, and the sun is quite close to Mercury. Mercury is at about 14 or 15 degrees of Capricorn. The two are separating after a conjunction. So it could be, as I say, that we've had a conversation recently with somebody, or we've seen something in the media or on social media. Something's been brought to our attention that's made us think possibly about things, and this could then precipitate a sort of an emotional reaction at the full moon. Now, do bear in mind that with the moon in Cancer, there can sometimes be an overreaction, particularly when we've got difficult aspects like a T-square to Chiron, which is a triggering of the core wound, or that Venus-Neptune square, which can sometimes skew our thinking a little bit. You know, we may not have the perspective to see things entirely clearly. So I think it'll be important not to overreact at this full moon, you know, and to also try to not feel that we have to sort of make decisions immediately. So if we don't feel that we have enough information, or we're feeling a little bit emotional, or perhaps you know, confused on some level, then having the foresight to just pause, wait for that cycle to, you know, for us to sort of cycle through that that emotion until things become a little bit clearer. So that's one thing to say. Of course, whenever the luminaries are square to Chiron, there is always an opportunity to heal, and I think this is very much about core wound transmutation. So taking where we may feel rejected, abandoned, somehow not recognized or appreciated, and transmuting that, learning important lessons around that, and then using it to grow and perhaps also to help others. And here again, I think that Bradley Nelson's emotional code can really be very useful and effective in helping us to let go of what he calls emotional baggage. So where we may get stuck, particularly within our emotional body, where energy may get trapped and stuck, and that can then cause, you know, all sorts of blockages or strange distortions in our field, which then distort, you know, other things in our lives. So as I said, very often, for example, if there are core wounds from childhood, this can then affect our relationships, you know, going forward in life, but it can also affect our relationship to money, because very often self-worth and value are connected to the way that we, you know, what we feel we deserve in terms of how much we get paid, but also how we feel we deserve to be treated by others. You know, both money and love or care are both forms of energy exchange. So I think it's worth kind of pausing to see, you know, if you are having trouble in one area, whether this may also relate to an area where you got stuck at some other point in your life, you know, in another area. So that's something to say. And then the luminaries will also be separating from a trine and a sextile to Uranus. Now, Uranus is going to be close to Black Moon Lilith, and as you know, I tend to see Black Moon Lilith as being about the dark side of the moon. So it's where we tend to have blind spots. And it can also be sometimes where we sort of lash out or react from a sort of defensive point of view, or where we project onto others. So, you know, if you do have core wounds, particularly around feeling different, excluded, like you don't belong, if you also may feel that you know, do you sort of tend to sort of cut things off or walk away, sometimes maybe as a defense mechanism? So do you perhaps reject other people before they can reject you? Do you sometimes, rather than sort of talk things through, just cut them out without saying anything? You know, if so, maybe this is part of a coping mechanism around a core wound that maybe needs to be kind of looked at. And of course, you know, I don't know about you, but I've sort of realized late in my life that sometimes we don't always have to necessarily confront something in our psyche directly. You know, say for example, if we have like a trauma, or if we have a phobia, that actually it can be it can actually make that behavior pattern worse. It can reinforce it if we continue to sort of re-experience it. That actually there are sort of less invasive and more indirect ways of dealing with those types of fixations, I would almost say, where we've got a little bit stuck perhaps in our emotional development, and just sort of free energy up psychically or energetically, and then very often things start to sort of heal themselves, you know, very much like in the body, where you get approaches like homeopathy, which don't necessarily treat the problem in the way that Western medicine believes you have to like attack something, you know, treat the symptoms. There are sort of other forms of medicine that are more gentle, you know, such as homeopathy and herbalism, that actually just gives the body or the immune system what it needs, and then allows the body to heal itself. So I think, you know, it's just something to think about there, particularly given that Uranus will be in Taurus, which is for me very much about very earthbound things. So the body, habits, you know, food, farming, nature, relationship to nature, that kind of thing. And then the final thing to sort of say about this this particular full moon is, of course, that Venus-Neptune square. Now, you'll probably notice that Venus is sitting quite close to the South Node in Sagittarius. In fact, they are both in the same degree, 18 degrees of Sagittarius. So that really, for me, points to the need or the opportunity for us to release any form of sort of attachment to what is unattainable, you know, where we kind of chase ghosts, where we chase ideals that are perhaps a little bit fantastical, or where we may sort of get stuck in trying to make sort of things work in a situation that's impossible, or where it's never, you know, where perhaps we aren't really being quite realistic about the true prospects, you know, whether this be in work, whether it be creatively, or whether it be in a relationship, or where we tend to overgive and or not have good boundaries, so not being able to say no, or where we may sometimes need to be very clear about our needs, or to sort of renegotiate. You know, if you think about an employer, we may sort of sign an employment contract, but the employer doesn't always necessarily stick to that contract. It's almost like an ideal that we aspire to in terms of behavior, or, you know, a reciprocal relationship, but sometimes one or both parties can kind of lapse, and I suppose that's just part and parcel of kind of being human and of life. And I think it's also sometimes having this sort of the wherewithal to kind of forgive and say, okay, well, I'm not perfect, neither is the other person. Is the situation retrievable or rescuable, you know, through renegotiation, or a kind of a reaffirming of needs or expectations, for example? Or is the situation perhaps was it based on dishonesty, or sort of unrealistic expectations to start with, and maybe, you know, we need to sort of like give it up and start from scratch, so draw a line under it and say, okay, we tried that, it didn't work, maybe, you know, I'm not suited to this, or this is not really where you're feeling happy, maybe we need to sort of think about going our separate ways, or perhaps just putting our energies in a place or a project or a relationship where they are better suited, and where there will be more, we'll get more out of it, and maybe so will the other person. So just something to think about at this particular full moon. So the fixed star aspects at this particular full moon are quite interesting, actually. First of all, we've got the sun and the moon on opposite sides of the horizon. So the moon will be making a conjunction to Alhina, which is one of the fixed stars in the constellation of Gemini, because of course, you know, in terms of the sidereal zodiac, the moon will be in Gemini, and that's how we tend to sort of that's the grid system used to identify where the stars are. So they still use the sidereal zodiac. So Alhina is called by Bernadette Brady the proudly marching one, and she sees it as being very strongly associated with this idea of you know, being attached to causes, supporting causes. So combined with the moon, it tends to speak of a need or a desire to kind of join a humanitarian cause, to give back, to help, to make a difference. And I think, given that we are talking here about some quite difficult energy with the Venus-Neptune square and then the T-square to Chiron, I think the important thing here is to learn the difference between making a difference on one hand and wanting to give back, but also not necessarily over-giving, so, you know, then becoming drained or creating dependency in others on one hand, or on the other hand, becoming a little bit sort of dominating or controlling on the other. You know, if we think particularly of the Cancer Capricorn axis, on the one hand, the sort of shadow side of Capricorn is a tendency to dominate on one hand, sometimes by withholding emotional praise, or you know, by sort of giving positive feedback to others, or being sort of stoic and perhaps not asking for help. So that's the sort of Capricorn end of the spectrum. And then on the other hand, you've got the Cancerian moon, and, you know, Cancer's sort of shadow side is either being overbearing, you know, think about sort of the overprotective or the overbearing mother. It can also sometimes be flipping over into the child, so being infantile, wanting other people to look after us, to take care of us. But in this situation, I think what it's talking about is that parental tendency to either want to use care as a way to dominate others, so actually as a way to manipulate others, or on the other hand to guilt people by saying, oh well, you know, I've given you so much, or you know, I'm kind of like busting my gut here and I'm not really getting any sort of appreciation, or alternatively being sort of the martyr, where one gives and gives and gives and then ends up resentful because the other person doesn't sort of reciprocate. And, you know, I think one of the things that I always remember from there's a chap on YouTube who does quite a lot of stuff about empaths, and he was saying that one of the sort of faults of empaths very often is that they overgive and they don't state their needs. So they are hoping that by giving that they will receive back in kind. But this is not. This is almost a cop-out, that one needs to learn to state one's needs and also to assert them in certain situations. So I think it's asking us, in a way, just to be careful of that aspect here with Alhina, that we can sometimes have the best of intentions, but not always necessarily execute in healthiest ways. And I think that's partly built into our society in the way that charitable giving is sort of set up. It's quite sort of it's based on sort of the model of patronage. So that's one thing to think about. Then the Sun will be making conjunction to Fasces, which is the star on the head of Sagittarius, the Archer. So again, we're being drawn back to these themes around vision and the sort of the aim of the Archer, which came up at the Sagittarius solar eclipse, and I think at the Gemini eclipse as well, because of the Sabian symbol. So for me, this is about the focus, sometimes deadly aim of a soldier, a sniper, or a bowsman, but it can also be the tunnel vision of a high achiever, somebody who's kind of aiming their bow into the sky and they want to sort of reach a particular goal. And so it can sometimes be very good. It can help us to get motivated and focused, so that that can be a good thing. On the other hand, especially if we think about it, the Sun as being in Capricorn, which is very ambitious, high achieving sign. On the other hand, the sort of shadow side of Capricorn is that it can sometimes be a little bit ruthless and kind of tramp over others in order to sort of get where it wants to go. And I think here the same thing applies. If we think about the Archer as being a soldier, essentially, so in a mystery of war, then I think there is sometimes the potential to be a little bit ruthless. So I think we need to again find that balance between wanting to achieve something, but not necessarily at all costs. Now the flip side, of course, is that with that Venus-Neptune square that we have, which can sometimes be about where we're a little bit unrealistic, it could also be that goals may be kind of out of reach. We may be setting the bar too high, in which case we are setting ourselves up for failure and disappointment. So maybe it's a case of needing to reassess at this full moon as we come to the end of 2020 to sort of say, well, how much progress did I make towards my goals? Putting aside, of course, circumstances that may have kept you stuck or held back, was there potentially a need to either try a different tack, perhaps give something up because it hasn't worked, or possibly to sort of recalibrate and sort of team up with somebody who's got skills that perhaps we don't have. So really just sort of taking this as an opportunity to rest and reflect on our goals and whether we may be setting ourselves up, as I say, for disappointment or for failure by possibly setting unrealistic goals or being a little bit over ambitious. Perhaps there's a need to sort of like break a goal down into smaller steps so that we at least feel that we're kind of getting somewhere, that there is progress over a longer period of time, rather than kind of having these very sort of noble but sometimes inflated ideas of delusions of grandeur almost, but that we may not necessarily have the skills or the experience to achieve, or they may take a very long time to get there. So just something to think about. So here we have the chart for where the full moon falls by sign. And seeing that it is a full moon, this means that the Sun and the Moon will be in opposite signs of the zodiac. So I suggest that you have a look at your rising sign and then have a look at the opposite sign, your polar opposite sign, to see where the Sun will be. And this will give you an idea of the two life areas that are being activated, the sort of polar axis that's being activated at this particular full moon. So if, for example, you have Cancer rising, for example, then it means that the Moon will be in your first house of self-expression, physical appearance, health, and so on. But the Sun will be in Capricorn, which is your seventh house of significant others, romantic partnerships, business partnerships, and so on. So it'll be those two areas of your life that you're trying to sort of balance. So have a look and see, and this should give you some idea of the life areas that may be activated or where you may be doing some of your work over the next 2 weeks or so of the waning moon cycle. So that's it from me. Short and sweet this time. I hope you found this useful. Do bear in mind that the energies I'm talking about last for the 2 weeks from the full moon to the following new moon. So if things aren't resonating straight away, then perhaps just give it a little while, and you may start to see, you know, these themes coming up for you in a couple of days or so. I'm also going to be redeveloping my members area of my website. I'm hoping that I can have it done in time to send out details with my next newsletter, but you know, that's not always possible, and you know, these things are a movable feast. However, just know that I will kind of keep you updated as, you know, developments come up. I'm also going to be taking a little bit of a break from social media. 2020, as I'm sure you will agree, has been quite intense, and I sort of feel the need to just take a breath, rest and regroup. So if I'm not really very active on YouTube or on social media, you know, Instagram and so on, that'll be why. But I'm wishing you all the very best for 2021. Take care of you and yours. I hope that you attain everything that you set your heart's desire on, and all the very best.